Putin is a liar who mocks the peace process, U.S. Senator warns. Republican Senator Roger Wicker delivered a sharp speech in the U.S. Senate, voicing strong support for Ukraine and harsh criticism of Russian dictator Putin. Wicker said there is no reason to trust the Kremlin, pointing out that Russia continues to escalate attacks despite talks of negotiations. He noted that Moscow recently carried out one of the largest air assaults of the war, showing little genuine interest in peace. He stressed that in recent weeks, the United States, Ukraine, and European allies have formed a common negotiating position and must remain united. The senator cited polls showing that 70% of Americans do not believe Putin would honor any peace agreement with Ukraine. He argued that Ukrainians continue to fight because the alternative is the destruction of their state and urged Washington and Europe to stand firmly with Kyiv. Wicker also called on President Trump to strengthen Ukraine's air defenses and long-range strike capabilities, saying this would send a clear signal to Russia's military goals are out of reach. Kremlin's demands go beyond Ukraine. Institute for the Study of War explains Putin's new signal to the West. Dictator Putin's war aims extend far beyond Ukraine, according to analysts of the US-based Institute for the Study of War, who reviewed his latest public statements. The experts point to Putin's claim that the war in Ukraine is a direct consequence of NATO's expansion and what he describes as the West's disregard for Russia's interest. Institute for the Study of War says this message makes one thing clear: Putin is not seeking a peace deal limited to Ukraine alone. Instead, analysts argue the Kremlin is pushing for a much broader objective and radical reshaping of Europe's security system and fundamental restructuring of NATO. The report notes that the alliance were to accept the ultimatums Putin issued in late 2021, it could undermine NATO's unity and force a complete overhaul of Europe's security architecture. Analysts also stresses that Moscow's demands go well beyond the proposals currently discussed in US-backed and other international peace initiatives. In a recent speech, Putin again called for a new and fair security architecture while warning of the continuation of the war and blaming the West and Ukraine for prolonging the conflict. The analysts conclude that the Kremlin is signaling the West that the stakes are not only Ukraine's future, but the balance of power across Europe as a whole. Britain will help Ukrainians get through the winter. The UK is providing an additional £20 million to support Ukraine's energy system after a new wave of Russian strikes on critical infrastructure. The funding will go toward emergency repairs, restoration and protection of power networks, aiming to keep homes, hospitals and schools supplied with electricity and heating during the harsh winter months. British officials say the support will help ensure energy for millions of families, children and elderly people, especially after Ukraine declared a state of emergency in its energy sector. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the UK would stand with Ukraine today, tomorrow and for the next 100 years, stressing that what happens in Ukraine matters to the entire world. Earlier, Ukraine raised the issue of massive attacks on its energy infrastructure at a Ukraine-NATO Council meeting and urged the US and Europe to speed up the delivery of new aid packages. France is deploying troops to Greenland. President Emmanuel Macron announced the move, describing it as a part of a broader show of European support for Denmark, amid tense discussions over the Arctic island's future. A first group of French military personnel is already on the ground. The deployment is set to be reinforced in the coming days with land, air and maritime capabilities. Macron said Europe has a special responsibility for the region, noting that it is both EU territory and the land of a NATO ally. France is joining military exercises launched by Denmark, which has also said it is increasing its own military presence in the Arctic. European officials stress that the goal of the deployment is not to deter the United States. NATO referred all questions about its role to Danish authorities, adding that the alliance is studying ways to strengthen security in the Arctic.
Let's look at the world we live in. The return of destabilizing powers, Russia on European soil, the destabilization by several regional powers, I could mention Iran and many others, and then a discourse that sometimes sows doubt, even among allies by some. but in any case, a new colonialism that is at work among a few. All this requires us to continue to strengthen the model that is ours, to strengthen our independence in all its operational components, and to continue accelerating on the strategy that is ours.
The US plans to keep Greenland on the table with talks every few weeks. Washington says negotiations with Denmark and the Greenlandic government will become a regular process with meetings scheduled every 2 or 3 weeks. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt described the latest round of talks as good and productive. The meeting held on January 14 at the White House brought together US Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, and Greenland's Foreign Affairs representative. America's interest in the Arctic island is not new. During his first term, President Donald Trump openly floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark, even suggesting annual payment of around $600 million for long-term use of the territory. The issue has changed sharply this month after social media posts showed Greenland colored in the Stars and Stripes, a move that drew a strong reaction from Copenhagen. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen publicly urged Trump to stop threatening to over the island, stressing that the United States has no right to annex any part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Iran holds 800 executions after a signal from Washington. Amid mass protest, Donald Trump's team sent a clear warning to Tehran. If the use of force and the pursuit of protesters continue, the response will be tough. Officials in Washington say that they are closely monitoring the situation and keeping all response options on the table. Trump has publicly voiced support for the Iranian people, saying that the help is on the way. US media report that the White House is weighing different scenarios, including military ones, but admits that there is no guarantee of a quick outcome in Tehran. The world built after the Cold War is fading away. A new era is beginning. An era of power, not rules. That is the message from Mark Leonard, director and co-founder of the European Council and Foreign Relations, in an opinion piece for Politico. He argues that the liberal international order based on democracy, alliances and shared values has effectively collapsed. According to Leonard, the foreign policy of Donald Trump's administration has accelerated the breakdown of the transatlantic partnership and weakened trust in the United States, even among Europe's closest allies. More and more Europeans, he writes, now see Washington not as a partner but as a competitor or even a threat. A survey by SCFR and Oxford University shows that only 1 in 6 Europeans considers that the US an ally. In Germany, France and Spain, the figure is close to 1 in 3, and in Switzerland, just under 40%. Leonard say the America First approach has reshaped Europe's role, no longer part of a united West, but a separate geopolitical actor. In Russia, he notes, hostility toward the United States has declined, while negative attitudes toward the European Union have sharply increased. Ukraine is also feeling this shift. Leonard writes that Ukrainians are increasingly looking to Europe rather than the US for security. Nearly 2/3 experts closer ties with the EU, while only a third look to Washington. At the same time, he points to a global drift toward China. In Brazil, Turkey, South Africa, and India, growing numbers of people now see Beijing as a more reliable partner than the United States. The world, Leonard concludes, is turning into a chessboard of spheres of influence where might makes right and the West is divided from within. So Europe now faces a stark choice: become a power in its own right or risk becoming a spectator in someone else's game. Trump and borrowed Nobel Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado said she handed her Nobel Peace Prize medal to Donald Trump during a meeting at the White House, calling it a gesture of gratitude for what she described as his unique commitment to Venezuela's freedom. The move immediately raised a bigger question: can a president accept a prize that was never awarded to him? The Nobel Institute has previously made it clear that a Nobel Prize cannot be transferred or reassigned, even symbolically. Machado did not clarify whether Trump formally accepted the medal. The White House also avoided a direct answer, saying the decision would be up to the president himself. Trump later described the moment as a gesture of mutual respect and thanked Machado publicly on social media. The meeting came less than 2 weeks after a U.S. operation led to the capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who was taken to New York to face trial. In Caracas, acting President Delcy Rodriguez delivered her first major address, while Washington signaled a willingness to engage with the new leadership.
The people of Bolivar are giving back to the heir of Washington a medal, in this case a medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, as a recognition for his unique commitment with our freedom.
Ukraine's war-scared Olympic training base is coming back to life under the shadow of bombs. In northern Ukraine, the winter training ground that produced the country's first Olympic medalist still stands in ruins. A ski track cuts through a burned forest, past shattered dormitories and mined land, a reminder of Russia's failed push toward Kyiv in 2022. The site, officially known as the sports ski base of the Olympic Reserve, lies on the outskirts of Chernihiv, the city that remains a regular target of Russian air attacks aimed at the power grid. Despite the destruction, children and teenagers have returned to train alongside a small group of hopefuls preparing for the Milan Cortina Winter Olympics. Most of Ukraine's elite winter athletes now train abroad, forced out by daily air raids, blackouts and damaged facilities at home. But some still come back to Chernihiv, choosing to train where the war is never far away. The base once trained hundreds of young athletes. Today it operates inside fenced-off safe zones, with modular units replacing burned-out buildings. Drills are often interrupted by air raid sirens, sending athletes and coaches to bomb shelters before they return to the track again. For many, the site is more than a sports facility. It is a part of Ukraine's identity and a symbol of what the country hopes to rebuild.
It hurts me very much. I understand that this is a border area, but to encroach on something sacred, on children, on the base, we understand that it will not be restored soon, because we will rebuild Ukraine from the ground up.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more content.